Since this episode was recorded, Pixel Tonic has released Craft Nitro as a beta. You can go grab it at github.com/craftcms/nitro, or you can check it out on their blog at craftcms.com/blog. And also our friend Ryan Ireland has made a training video on how to set it up at craftquest.io. Enjoy the episode, everybody. Welcome to devMode.fm, a podcast dedicated to the tools, techniques, and technologies used in modern web development. I'm Andrew Welch from NY Studio 107.
I'm Patrick Harrington from Mildly Geeky in Boston.
I'm Jonathan Melville from MDD in Atlanta.
And with us today, we have on Jason McCallister from Pixel Tonic. How you doing, Jason?
Good. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yep, no worries. And we have on Brad something or other from Pixel Tonic too. Brad, how you doing?
I'm alive.
Well, that's good. So we're having you folks on today because we wanted to talk to you about a little something that you've been working on called Nitro. You know, I don't really understand what this thing is. So Jason, if you were out in Hoona, Alaska, and you're about to plunge down the world's longest zip line at the Icy Strait Point, and the guy who was strapping you into the harness said, "Hey, you know, what is Nitro anyway?" What would you tell him?
First of all, I'm afraid of heights.
Oh, good.
So,
well, it's only 1,300 feet that you go down, and the length is just over a mile. So it's not too bad. So
I would say probably tell my wife I love her. No, seriously.
Tell him to focus on your safety instead of asking these dumb questions.
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
Look, your life is in his hands. You better satisfy him the way he wants, okay? So tell him what this Nitro thing is.
So Nitro is a command line tool that makes local craft development super easy by orchestrating kind of the common tasks that you do with a normal server, but locally.
So you said it makes development easy. Does that mean it builds my websites for me, or what does this thing do exactly?
That's the pro version.
The
drag and drop builder.
Yeah. That doesn't exist, by the way.
No, but seriously, like, what part of the whole equation does this thing do? Does it fit in? Like, it's just for the local development environment part of this thing?
Yes. So what it does is uses a tool called Multipass.
Okay.
Underneath, and that is a way that you can make a virtual machine on Windows, Mac, Linux, and it's an Ubuntu machine kind of out of the box. Mm-hmm. So instead of going through and installing PHP and Redis and MySQL or Postgres and setting permissions, doing all that, Nitro automates a lot of that stuff for you. So you don't have to worry about that. You just run a command in Nitro init, and it asks you some questions: how much RAM, how much disk space, and which version of PHP in your database, and then the rest is done by Nitro.
And is this you said it's a command line tool, so it's asking me all of this stuff in the command line, or is there a GUI for it, or how does that work?
Right now, it's just a command line. So there's a interactive CLI prompt.
What's the matter, Patrick?
GUI. Oh, you know me. I like to see things.
Well, I'm sure that they would accept a pull request from you if you built the GUI on top of it, right?
Yeah, I'll just do a little Electron app. We'll set that up.
Well, you can do Electron, you can do Qt, you can do whatever you want. Build a nice little GUI on it.
All right, good.
All right, so it's a CLI tool, okay? But how is this different? Like you said that it will spin up an Ubuntu box. Like, something I've been using for a long time is Homestead, which is layered on Vagrant. Like, how is it different than that?
So it's different because the only thing that we have that we need is Multipass. And Multipass, I think it's like a 40 megabyte install from Canonical. That's the company that runs Ubuntu. And then it uses the hypervisor. So Vagrant, I'm not sure if it can use the hypervisor. It's been a while since I've looked into that, but you can set it to use VirtualBox. So you have VirtualBox, Vagrant that's installed, and then you have Homestead. So instead of having all those things, we just have a binary that's our CLI tool, and then Multipass, and that's it.
Yeah. So, I mean, Vagrant, I looked into this because I was curious. You can use a hypervisor like HyperKit, Hyper-V, whatever these things. But I was looking through it, and they had all of these caveats. Like, they had enough caveats that I just closed the browser window. I'm like, yeah, okay.
I've tried to use Fusion on my Mac, and it's been a nightmare. The only thing that ever worked was VirtualBox, but that's a big download, and it gets in deep into your networking interfaces. It does a whole lot. Is Multipass, sounds like it's much lighter.
It's very light. And when we first kind of came up with this idea, I was just messing around with Multipass, and I was like, let me just log in, create a web server, and see how it runs. And I was really surprised in how fast Craft was running inside of that, just out of the box. And I didn't really do anything for performance, no op cache. So I was like, okay, maybe there's something here. And then kind of looked at some of the Multipass commands, and I was like, hey, this has everything that we would really want to do with a Vagrant machine, but we can maybe make this a little simpler. Because I mean, Vagrant's been around for a while. It's a great tool. I've used it for many years, but I think that there's kind of a different trend in kind of setting these configs up. And you look at things like Kubernetes, and has the kubectl, kube control command. And so Nitro is kind of a little bit inspired by that, where we just say, hey, we have a remote thing, a quote unquote API, and we want to just manage installing PHP and changing databases. And that's kind of where Nitro came from with Multipass.
And also from the perspective of working with a team. So, I mean, Homestead isn't terrible to set up, but it can be sort of annoying. It's definitely not a quick process if you're trying to get a remote team member set up and working on like a Vagrant environment. Is this solution maybe a little bit quicker in terms of getting a development environment up and going?
So, and I'm going to ask Brad to maybe chime in too, because we had an initial version. We've had a couple initial versions, and we've kind of refocused a little bit to have more of a global machine, but you still can have multiple machines, and everything kind of lives in your .nitro in your home directory, kind of like Docker, and Composer has like a .composer file. So we put all your machines in there in a little simple YAML file, and that's kind of what we use. So it doesn't really, I mean, we could do it per project and maybe ship a Nitro YAML file, but I'm not sure if we're going to do that yet.
Yeah, I think it is. It does speed up. Part of the reason we write this, like most of everything else we've written, is to like scratch a lot of our own itches too, and then it turns out to be something good that we release. So like as far as getting all of our team members on a common platform and like helping with support and trying to spin up environments, it does kind of speed things up like that, because we're optimizing for it. So there's import commands where we can automatically import databases from the host machine into the VM, and just stuff like that. Overall, I feel like it is a more streamlined and lightweight experience than something like over Homestead or MAP or any of the other type stuff.
So this is optimized for Craft, but I'm assuming that I could, if I wanted to spin it up and install WordPress or Expression Engine on it, like it would work.
What year is it?
Or Mojo Motor.
If I needed to get my Mojo Motor site up and running, like could it run? I would assume it's the same stack, so I assume it would run, right?
Yeah, there's nothing stopping you from that other than taste.
Good taste. All right, fair enough. But okay, so there's Valet, there's Docker, there's DDev, there's Flywheel, there's Local, there's MAMP, there's WAMP, there's XAMPP, there's Homestead, there's Laragon. Like, does the world need another local dev environment?
Yeah, is this going to save you on support time, Brad?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the problem is, like most things in our industry, like they all suck in their own unique ways,
Sure. Right.
So we're trying to find something that would suck the least amount for craft development.
I see. Okay. And so that means that we need a new thing? Like, I see all these things out there, and I'm just wondering, like, it's the same thing with like JavaScript frameworks. Like, how many do we need? And but you think this is really going to make it so that a craft developer can sit down and get up to speed and running quicker?
I think so, because like we get people like writing in all the time, and I'm sure you do. That's why you put out these blog posts about Homestead development and Docker development. Like people are looking for
5-minute read.
Just 5-minute read. People are looking for ways to streamline their development environments.
Right.
Like Homestead is great. Like it's heavy. It has its quirks. Like I randomly run into like port collision problems and all this other stuff. And well, one of the appealing things about Multipass is that you get your own IP address. None of it runs on localhost, so you don't have to worry about port collisions and forwarding and all that stuff. Like it makes things simpler, and hopefully that translates into a simpler development environment, especially for people that aren't as comfortable with this type of stuff like that we are. Maybe they're new to craft, and like now we have a something to point them to get them up and running quickly that isn't MAMP or a 30-minute Homestead read on your blog.
Okay, so let me take a step back. So when I first heard that this was something you folks were doing, I was like, oh, Jason must have, gotten his Raspberry Pi stack, like he spun his Kubernetes cluster up on it and he got this thing running on it and he thought it was cool, and it ended up, just being a little experiment he was playing with. But it sounds like it might also be a support-based thing, right? Where you folks are just like, whoa, we get a lot of support issues that have to do with just people getting this working in their local dev environment. Is it kind of support driven as well?
I mean, that's part of it, sure.
Yeah.
But I mean, the goal here is to raise the entire craft development ecosystem up. Like the more we can do to help make that a better experience. And I think that's one of the things that Laravel does very well. There's the framework, but then they have all the development environment stuff around it, and they have all the supporting packages, and like it's a great ecosystem, and that's what we're trying to do with the craft ecosystem as well.
Nice.
When you were looking at options, and I'm, there's like a Christopher Walken quote here, so you're catching me at a very interesting time. I can't remember which movie. Anyway, I'm at the point where like Valet is starting to stress things a little bit on my end. This is very interesting, but I've also been looking at going Docker. It seems like so many things are going Docker these days. Was that an option you looked at? What made you go for Multipass? Where are there advantages, disadvantages? I'd love to know more about that.
I mean, yeah, Docker is great, but you're not gonna get like it's too complicated for the average to like a new person. Like it's too overwhelming.
Yep.
And things like DDEV and Lando, like they try and abstract the long commands and the complexity away, but ultimately you're still struggling to get Xdebug working in Docker. You're still struggling to get Symlinks working in Docker. A lot of developers, especially plugin developers, have Symlink repos and all that, and it's just too much, I think. So, which was a great appeal of Multipass, just simplifying everything.
Are there any big drawbacks to going Multipass? Is there anything I lose out on? Let's say I've got one of Andrew's finagled hot module reloading, Xdebug, catching, all good stuff that literally I've come to depend on now. I'm teasing you, Andrew, but I've come to depend on for development. Are there any drawbacks to that, or does it still enable that sort of both easy to get into as well as very heavy local development requirements?
I think I think it makes those kind of tasks, like we have a ticket right now to make the HMR process a lot easier. One of the things that we have now is just Nitro Xdebug on, and that will configure your Nitro machine for remote debugging. We have like a doc too, and I mean, I've been doing PHP for years, and Brad and I sat down and pair programmed on getting that working one day, and we're like, is that really it? Is it working? Is it like, no way, like let's try the console and make sure it worked. Oh, yeah, it did. So we wrote that up in a doc, and we're going to clean that up some more. But it's super easy, and that's the kind of approach we want to take for HMR, because we know like Vue CLI is important, and as these applications start becoming more JavaScript or hopefully less, you see kind of this approach where people have NPM problems. There's Yarn, and then there's the other one that Andrew mentioned the other day. I can't remember what it was called, but there's all these different tools. And sometimes if you get like the wrong version of Node on a Mac, it's like Valet. If you get the wrong version of PHP or something breaks and you want to fix that, man, good luck.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
So
The ultimate nightmare.
yeah. So what we want to do is just make very, very simple commands to make those things very simple. Like we have an add command that walks you through interactively, like, hey, what folder you want to add? Do you want to add this one? Okay, well, we'll automatically go and detect like, hey, what's the web root? Is there a web, a public, whatever ones there are? And then, okay, we'll automatically fill that for you. So, okay, well, just click like in 3 buttons, you can add a site, and that'll actually go through and edit your host file. So you have craft3.test is already ready to go, and you can just click a button and you're done.
Can you talk about some of the tools that are sort of included in there? I think I heard you mention Redis, but like, what if I wanted to test webhooks? Is like ngrok included in there? Like what other kind of little packages are part of like the standard setup for this?
So for the standard setup, there's one thing that's interesting I'm going to point out real fast is we do use Docker inside the VM. Nginx and PHP are installed on the VM, but the databases are inside of a Docker container, which means that you can run, a lot of companies want to run multiple multiple versions of MySQL, but doing that on an actual machine is kind of a pain. You have port collisions, stuff like that. So what we did is we containerized those. And when you define a database inside of Nitro, it's actually running in a container, and all the commands are kind of abstracted out. And we do port, we make sure the ports are good. So you can have MySQL 5.7 and 8.0 running in the same Nitro machine. So another thing that we do that makes it a little bit easier is we install like Redis. We could put that in a container, but why? You just need Redis. Most people need Redis. So that's kind of like our approach is it's like having a DigitalOcean droplet that has pre-installed software for you. It's got Redis, it's got the PHP versions, it's got Docker inside of it. I think there's some other stuff that's usually mostly for scripts like JQ and other command line tools.
So this is probably most analogous to Homestead in a way, right? Because Homestead is built on top of Vagrant. So it's like a specific box for Vagrant, but then also comes with some additional tooling along with it. And it sounds like that's kind of what Nitro is, in that it's kind of a specific provision for Multipass along with some tooling that you brought along with you. Is that right?
Yeah, it uses something that a lot of cloud providers actually use already. It's called Cloud Init, which is it's Cloud Config, Cloud Init. I don't know why they have such a controversial naming. The file is a cloud, whatever, but it doesn't matter. So what we have is this it's a YAML file. And we say, hey, when you boot this machine on the first instance, I need you to install these packages, put these scripts there, run these commands, right? So what you get when you run Nitro is all bundled inside is kind of like a pre-built stack. So you're right, it's kind of like Homestead, but it's a little more portable, if that makes sense.
Right. And more lightweight, right?
Yes.
Yeah, by virtue of the fact that it's sitting on top of Multipass, which is using a hypervisor to do its thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think the other key difference too is we're developing this kind of like with the Craft /Pixel and Tonic philosophy in mind, where we want to have a great developer experience for it, but we want it to be kind of like infinitely flexible like Craft is too. So it's always like a fine line to balance ease of use and advanced complexity, which I think like Craft has typically done a pretty good job at. And so we're trying to apply that same philosophy to Nitro as well.
Now, is this something that I can point my designer dev friends at and say, here, use this, and they'll be reasonably comfortable in getting it set up?
Yeah, I mean, that's the plan, right?
Well, I don't know. You tell me.
Oh, sorry. That's the plan, period.
Okay, that's the plan here. So the reason I'm asking that is kind of like Patrick was all sad about no GUI. I mean, there are some designer devs who are like, well, if it means I have to use a terminal, then I'm not feeling too comfortable anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely not against adding like a light GUI on top of this at some point. It's definitely not for a 1.0 type of thing.
No.
Right.
Patrick, could you give us a time frame on that pull request?
Yeah,
I'll get right on it. Yeah. One thing I'm curious about, where Multipass is all Ubuntu, I often am running Ubuntu up on AWS or DigitalOcean. Does this give you any assurances or any good pathways to then moving a local development environment up there and being able to, could I almost use the same sort of scaffolding that Nitro is using to then set something up there? Is that how Cloud Init works?
Yeah. So Cloud Init, like Amazon uses Cloud Init, DigitalOcean. If you ever spin up a droplet that says add your config or your cloud config, yep. That is a Cloud Init file, and that's again another project by Ubuntu or Canonical. So yeah, you could take that same stack and maybe there's some plans in the future to make that maybe a little more exportable. But for now, yeah, you could definitely use that same kind. And here's a good point. 20.04 came out of Ubuntu yesterday, and I just took the pull request I'm working on and I just hard coded it to see if it would work.
Yeah.
And it's same stack, no changes to the code, infrastructure, it's just ready to go.
That's awesome. Yeah. No, I mean, that to me, anything that can make going from local up into staging or production, whatever, a little bit easier, I think both for experienced devs and new devs, to have a pathway to getting something on DigitalOcean, knowing that you're not going to need extra PHP extensions or whatever. Maybe you just turn off Xdebug in the init. That could be really appealing.
Yeah, because I run into this doing support for my plugins, and I'm sure that it's something that you folks at Pixel and Tonic run into because, I mean, I see it in the Discord and on Stack Exchange all the time that a huge percentage of the problems that people have with Craft are not actually Craft problems. They're either local dev config problems or they're production config problems. Is that Does that resonate? Is that something that you see, that a lot of the support is not actually, I have a problem with craft, it's more, I have a problem with my either local or production environment?
Yeah, I would guess 60 to 70% of the tickets we see are just environmental specific problems.
Yeah.
Which is an astronomical amount. Like, they have nothing to do with the CMS itself.
Right. Yeah, I would totally believe that based on what I see in people asking questions in Discord. Like, a huge number of them are environmental. And then also just in the kind of questions that I get, you know, I spend a decent amount of my time basically helping people fix their setup, right? Which is, you know,
it's such a large percentage that anything you can do to even knock a small part of that down, like, takes out a significant number of tickets.
And so from your perspective, that's helpful in terms of reducing the support burden, hopefully. But also you can think about it from a kind of Aesop's Fables point of view, where it's kind of like pulling the thorn out of the paw of the lion. You know what I mean? You would be reducing the pain point of a whole lot of people if you end up with a solution that makes it easier for them to get up and running, because they don't care about their local dev environment. They just want to work on their project.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's, you know, one of the reasons that, like, we started going down this path was to, number one, to help us have a way to reduce support load and spin up environments quickly, but to help developers and people new to craft to have a common ground and a consistent, easy way to develop craft sites and to kind of reduce variables and hopefully make things better.
Yeah, because in an ideal world, the average front-end developer wouldn't have any idea what their local dev is, right? It would just be something that just works, you know? And we may never get exactly there, but it shouldn't be 60%. I mean, that's just insane.
Yeah, pretty nuts. Definitely not something you think about when you start off like writing a CMS, you know?
Do you ever see this? I'm thinking about what the install and what the first install experience is for a new developer to craft. Do you see this as being something that becomes part of the craft install? Either maybe not explicitly like here it is as part of what is a .craft setup, but something that says, you know, do you need a way to get started on a server, run these 3 commands, maybe install Multipass first, and building it in to really streamline that as well?
Yeah, I mean, we've discussed like having kind of starter projects with Nitro. Definitely not on the 1.0 list, but yeah, it's something we've talked about. Kind of like, because like once you kind of control the development platform, like all of these options all of a sudden open up, and you control the development platform and the CMS, then you can start to do all sorts of neat things with it.
And this
is how you're going to build. This is how you're going to build an operating system, Brad.
Yeah, this is how Skynet starts.
Yeah.
This is the gateway drug, Brad. Pretty soon you're gonna have Tonic OS. Away you go.
Brad too.
Well, this reminds me, though, of the conversation that we had with Matt Gray a while ago about his served product. And so that's something that makes it super, super easy for you to spin up a craft instance in production. And one of the things I mentioned to him on the podcast is I'm like, man, you already have like the Docker container stuff nailed. It would be amazing if you had a local dev environment that kind of had a nice GUI associated with it that went along with your Docker container setup that is used in production, that people can just click a button to get it up and running. Like, how amazing would that be if it was an end-to-end kind of solution? Is that something that you folks have thought about in terms of like, will we ever see Nitro in production somewhere at some point?
I'm not sure about production. Jason may have separate thoughts on this, but I mean, we definitely have thought about, like, because it is all based on cloud init, like have thought about how to make it portable between environments. I guess we'll just have to put some more thought into what that means long term, like, and if that means, okay, eventually this could end up in production and the consequences of that.
And an acceptable answer also would have been, Andrew, just let us ship it first, okay?
yeah. Let's get 1.0 out.
What do you think, Jason? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I see some complexities there, but I also see a good path forward too. Because I think that, let's go back to Docker for a second. I'm gonna talk about Laradoc. I mean, I've used Docker for a long time. I've used PHP for a long time, and PHP and Docker kind of make it a little funny because, you know, the single process rule inside of Docker. But the thing that I found really interesting about these other products, and I haven't used Lando or DDev, I haven't used any of those, but I did use Laradoc when it first came out. And I remember setting that up, and there were so many configuration options. I was like, I don't even know what I'm doing right now. I don't know what file to touch. So I think that, you know, starting on a local dev stack is a good start to kind of see those pain points and common use cases, and maybe there is something that we can do to make it to go into production, but I think that's something we definitely have to evaluate down the line.
Yeah, and for anyone who's listening who isn't aware of what these things are, so DDev, Laradoc, Lando, these are all kind of tools that are layered on top of Docker, right? For primarily for local dev, right, Jason?
Yes.
And I think Flywheel is the same. Is that Docker based as well? That comes out of WordPress, I think, right?
I'm not sure if that's Docker based, but I've heard of that and I haven't used that either.
Yeah, so I was actually surprised. So I know the first time that we had you on talking to us about Docker, and this was before I had gone down any kind of a Docker deep dive, and I was surprised that the solution that you came up with is not Docker based. So talk about that for a minute. Like, what is the reasoning there? Is it just easier to do this way, or what benefits are there by? Is it a simpler for the end user to have this not be Docker based, or what's going on?
So I'm going to give you what I think is Ubuntu's roadmap coming up.
All right.
So the ecosystem for development to production is, kind of exploding. We've got things like Kubernetes, we've got Docker Swarm, which I think is definitely going out. And then we also have like Docker Desktop, and then we have tools like everything's kind of going towards Kubernetes, but there's still a problem if you're on Mac OS or Windows. Actually, Windows has, I'll talk about that in a second. Mac OS, when you're running Docker Desktop installs a virtual machine and then kind of builds Docker inside of that, right? Because Mac doesn't have native container support. So the thing we usually get is we got volume mounts, and those are usually really, really slow, right? That's the big feedback I hear on Docker for craft development is it's super slow to mount in all those files, and you can do some hacks, and nobody wants to hack on anything. They just want things to work, right? So one of the interesting things about going to Docker was, okay, we still have the same problem where we still have this virtual machine you're putting stuff into, and you got to tweak all these settings, and you still have this problem like if you have your vendor folder in a volume, then it's still a pain, right? You have to rebuild and use that local Docker file. So when I started looking around at what Canonical was doing, I was like, oh, they have Multipass, they have Cloud Init, they have Micro K8s, which is a super easy way to do Kubernetes on your machine, which also uses Multipass. And then I think it was yesterday, Brett Fisher did I don't know, what do you call those things on Twitch or whatever on Twitter? I'm so showing my age right now.
Live stream?
Live stream, thank you. But what was interesting is that he started talking about Docker and Multipass, and he was going over this, and it's really a really good kind of overview of Multipass itself. But he had an instance where he was like, well, I think there might be something here where Docker is, contributing a lot of stuff upstream to HyperKit and Moby. So I actually think that kind of the Ubuntu roadmap is going to be to really get development of VMs, which really, people say containers aren't VMs, they're not, but that is a struggle for local dev is Docker is a painful setup process, and it depends on how you build it. It's not very opinionated. And I think that when we were evaluating the tools, I kind of went on a rant, but Docker's still kind of a pain point for PHP development, and Nitro is using a VM that makes it a little simpler.
Yeah, it always surprised me that the bits that are needed for Docker to run natively on Linux, that there hasn't been a push to port those to Darwin or Mac OS. Like, I don't understand. Like, why is it just that it's not a priority because they care more? I say they, like the people in charge of working on Docker, care more about it in production and the Kubernetes angle than they do about the local dev angle, or what's the deal?
I think they think it's important, and I think they'd like to. I think the hang up is really Apple.
Yeah.
Apple has its own priorities and its own security, and they look like they're going to go into ARM next year, so that's going to be a big change. And what's that going to break? And they're still beholden to Intel, so they're trying to figure out their chips on some of the iPads and iPhones are better than some desktops.
Right. Right.
So
I feel like Apple's even been moving away from, it used to come with, Ruby and Python and PHP, and I feel like they've even been pulling back on a little bit of that. So adding on more to let, just to let Docker run close to the metal may not be something they're moving in the direction of.
I mean, I guess, but for the most part, outside of video professionals and graphic designers, the other reason why they sell MacBooks is to developers.
That's a good point, because I chose a MacBook because I needed to run to SSH into a server.
Right. And
I was like, well, how do I do that in PowerShell? Oh, you buy this $1,000 extension.
Right.
No, I'm good. And then I bought my first MacBook and I dual booted Windows. I'm like, oh man, this is so fast on a MacBook. That's so bizarre. So yeah, I just think the priorities are different, but also look at what Windows is doing the past few years.
Right.
It is a completely different company. And the fact that I mentioned earlier, but Docker on Windows is using the WSL environment. So it really is just running you would on Linux. So and Mac's behind.
I mean,
right?
I never,
no matter
I
how you
never
put it.
thought that I would say this, but it seems like Microsoft gets it way more than Apple does for a lot of things. I mean, they bought GitHub, right? And they came out with VS Code, and then they also now bought NPM. I mean, they are positioning themselves right in our wheelhouse.
I think this is when they got their new CEO, they kind of like the whole company kind of rebooted,
Right.
and they've been on fire. Like
Right.
I've been super impressed.
Yeah, I mean, whereas Apple, honestly, like one of the reasons why they even still sell MacBooks is because you need a Mac environment to develop applications for the iPad and iOS. Like, I mean, it just doesn't run anywhere else. And a decent number of people that end up buying their laptops are developers that are developing stuff for iOS just for iOS or obviously Mac OS. But that's a decent amount of it. So that's why I'm surprised that they aren't focusing at least some effort on it. You know, I mean, I don't know.
There's been chatter too about the quality of Mac OS over the last couple of years. It definitely seems to be slipping.
I'm still happy with it. I'm just saying that, you know, it surprises me that there isn't kind of a focus on, because Docker is this kind of thing where it just seems like it's such a really good concept that I'm surprised that they are not embracing it. You know, the way that Windows is apparently starting to fold it in and embrace it.
That's a good point, because I think what you're talking about is for local development. I think Docker is the best approach for production.
Right.
Because I mean, look at auto scaling and things like ECS and Fargate, where you know you only pay for what you're using, and you don't have to worry about the underlying servers and EC2 instances, because Fargate will just scale. You say, I want 4, okay, we'll do it. So I still think when you go for local development, VMs still kind of make a lot of sense, but for production, that kind of container thing is new, and it's the better way to do it. But I think too that a lot of people that are used to kind of doing PHP sites might not have that Docker experience, but
Right.
with Nitro, you're kind of getting a little bit of the taste of the water with the database containers.
Right. And again, like I said, I mean, the people that are using Craft and are building sites, like they don't want to ever have to set up their local dev environment. It's like the least enjoyable thing that they want to do, because it's a roadblock in the way of them getting their work done. So anything that you folks can do to get rid of that, to change that roadblock into a speed bump or whatever analogy you want to use, I mean, I think that's a fantastic thing. But Jason, we need to address, it's very important we get this out in the open and be transparent about it. We need to address the Davenport matter.
Oh,
Okay, can you elaborate? What do you mean?
Is it true or false that Jalen Davenport handed you a bunch of money because he was sick of doing valet support, and he said, please build a local dev environment. I can't take all of these Laravel valet support questions anymore. Is it true or false?
There's an NDA.
There's an ND. All right. Well, you didn't say no. You didn't deny it. Okay. You didn't deny it. But it is, I mean, that gets back to, it is true though. Like Jalen has done a ton of valet support. And the thing about valet is, and it's similar to MAMP and WAMP and some of these other things, is that it runs on your host operating system, right? So like you said, when you screw up or you got the wrong version of PHP installed, like when things go wrong, like everything is just ground to a halt and dead in the water. And that's why I've always liked a virtual machine where I put all of my tools are in it, you know, and I do, if anything goes wrong, that's fine. I just nuke it and it goes away. And that's something that we can also be doing with Nitro, right?
Yeah, so that's the thing is if you look at how Valet was created, right? And you remember that video when it came out with Adam Wathan talking about Valet and Homestead specifically,
Yep.
or Vagrant, whatever. I don't remember what he said in the video, but he was scratching his itch because it sucked to set up Homestead.
Right.
So what we were looking at is, okay, you have a VM, you need NPM, you need that. We give you root access. All you have to do is Nitro SSH and you're into your machine. You can do whatever you want. And if when you're done working, you just do Nitro stop and it shuts down the machine and you're ready to continue with your day. You save your battery life, right? Because everything uses memory. So it's going to take a little bit of a strain. But Valet was a call to action for making local development easier. So they solved an itch they had from one of their own products.
It is, but all of those solutions that layer wear on your local computer. I get it. Like, they're faster, and I think that that is important. And I know that that was really important to Adam. Like, one of the things that he cared a whole lot about was response times. Like, he wanted something that just boom, like responded immediately and didn't slow him down when he's working on it. But I think there are different kinds of speed, right? So there's a overall speed that you have to keep in mind, the amount of time that you have spent like tearing your hair out trying to get the stupid local dev setup to work because you've got a different version of PHP installed and it needs this DLL and this doesn't, you know what I mean? Like, you have to factor all of that in terms of the overall quote unquote speed of using the thing, I think.
Yeah, I mean, all of these development environments, they're all trying to solve a similar problem, but they're all deciding on where they draw the line as far as what their acceptable trade-offs are. And they've all picked different places. Like,
right.
The Valet is, okay, I want fast response times and I'm okay with installing things on my host machine. And if something breaks, then that's going to slow me down. That's, they're all opinionated in these areas. So like Nitro is our take on where we have decided to draw the line for trade-offs, and based on our experiences of support and craft developers, getting them up to speed as fast as possible. So yeah, it's just like our take on it. Like I said earlier, I'm old and jaded. Like, all software sucks in its own unique ways. But we're trying to make this one suck the least. That's why I'm on the marketing team.
Well, you're trying to make it suck your way, right?
Yeah.
No, I get it.
Acceptable levels of suck.
And the
So
way
is that the official slogan for it? Is this one sucks the least?
I'm gonna have to run that by Leah first.
Nitro is the worst local development except for all the others.
well, you also have to run that by the BB Edit guys, because their slogan is "it doesn't suck." So you can't just rip that off and appropriate it, Brad. It's not.
Well, no, I'm not saying it doesn't suck. I'm saying it sucks the least.
Sucks the least. Okay, all right, I guess it is your own kind of unique spin on it, But I think of these local dev environments kind of like I think about getting the kids ready to go outside and play. So let's say it's a muddy, rainy day, and the valet kind of setup is, well, I don't care what they're wearing, just let them run outside in their sneakers. You know what I mean? Because we don't want anything slowing them down. Just get them out there. And if you have them using a VM, it's like you're actually having them put on like a raincoat and boots, so that then when they go out there, if they do fall in a puddle or get all muddy or whatever, no big deal. Just take the boots off, Whereas if you didn't have that kind of extra layer in there, it's just you have to hose them down, and it's going to be a whole nightmare to kind of do anything with them.
What's it? No, expand that analogy to Docker. How does that work?
So Docker
is its own Ziploc bag.
No. Have you ever seen those bubbles where you can put them? You can put them in this like padded bubble and like throw them down the hill. That's kind of Docker.
Okay.
Where it takes a little bit of setup, but you gotta get them in the little container and all that kind of stuff. But then you can just throw them down the hill and like nothing's gonna happen, Although that does remind me of a gerbil that I had when I was a kid, and I put it in a ball. I brought it outside so it could run around, and it was at the top of this big hill, and it started to go down the hill on the road, and it went flying down there. And the last thing I saw was it took this huge leap as it went like over into traffic down in the city area. And that was the last that I ever saw.
If anyone from PETA is listening to this podcast, he's just kidding.
Well, I was young and reckless. But anyway, forgetting about all of that kind of stuff. Let's bring it back. So when is this thing going to ship? When are we going to get our dirty mitts and be able to do something with Nitro?
It's not officially released. It's up on the Craft CMS repo now under Nitro. Mm-hmm. Let's call it a soft release. But we're hoping to have it out, an official 1.0, in the next week or two, ready to go. You can use it now, just we'd like feedback on it, and there's already people that have found it and have created issues. But yeah, hoping in the next week or two.
Well, okay, Brad, it's a soft release. Well, it's software, so it has to be a soft release of some kind. But just to give people a date, so you're saying early May-ish, this thing should be out and officially ready for them to use and for you guys to support. Is that right?
Right, yeah. And we'll have blog post and tweet and all that good stuff when 1.0's out, so make some fanfare for it.
And documentation and training videos and all that kind of fun stuff?
Yeah.
Matt is on it.
Yeah, Matt's on it.
Is that why Matt's not on the podcast? You have him like toiling away in the dark dungeon somewhere? Is that what's going on?
Funny because he's been DMing me questions, and I'm like, dude, I'm trying to talk about Nitro right now. But no, Matt wrote that awesome craft tutorial that we released a week or two ago,
Yep.
and that's going to be updated with Nitro, so people can get their onboard experience with Craft and Nitro at the same time, which I think is great.
Very cool.
Now, Jonathan actually asked you something, and I'm curious about this. Like, I understand, like, part of the goal here is to potentially reduce support burden if you have something that makes it easier to get this thing up and running. Are you worried that it's going to be an additional support burden, though, just supporting people that are using this thing, or do you already have to do that for people who are using every crazy dev environment under the sun?
Yes, to that last part. We're already supporting MAMP and WAMP and XAMPP and Homestead and Valet and Docker and every single type of environment you can think of. So yes, there will be support with Nitro, but it's going to be, the theory is it's going to be cutting into all that other support.
And what about if someone is using this with something else? I mean, let's say Rick Ellis is spinning up Expression Engine in it and he writes in for you to support. Is that something that you're still going to support it, or?
Please tell us if that does happen.
Yeah, no, that would just, it would be amazing, honestly. No, but yeah, obviously, like it's a standalone product. We're not going to limit our support to it just for Craft.
But it's free, right?
Yeah, it'll be free.
But earlier on you mentioned, or maybe it was Jason mentioned, like a pro version that built websites for you. Is that coming, or what's that about?
You missed my sarcasm cue like completely.
Oh, okay.
Oh.
Yeah, there's no pro version of Nitro. No. I think having open source, and to Brad's point, is trying to reduce some support burden. Think of like, if people are having issues with Nitro, then we just make that change to our product and we just make it better. Right? Like you can run, it's definitely for Craft, but you can run a Laravel app inside of this and it'll still set up some defaults. I mean, the PHP, maybe you might have to install another extension if you want to do something that's very specific. I can't think of anything right now. I think we have most all the extensions that you would need for both. But if you wanted to install something else, I think it's for that too.
Is it just another line in the YAML, or is it a command? Like, how do I add a PHP extension?
So we have a ticket where we're going to talk about, again, this is the Pixel and Tonic Craft way, right? Is to make these very complex things very simple. So we have a ticket, an issue that we want to work on where we have a PHP command, and some of those flags, if you want to change the memory, you just pass as a flag. So we'll just go into the machine and just do that for you.
Nice.
So the goal here is to have we have some other stuff too. Nitro add, Nitro remove. The one I'm working on right now is Nitro rename if you want to rename a site, a host name, because you, for whatever reason. And it's crazy because it just goes through and it just updates your host file to point those domains to the new IP. And we're looking at ngrok that we want to kind of do some kind of share functionality. But ngrok recently kind of went through a 2.0 where they closed source their products. So maybe there's an alternative, and there's another ticket too we're working on for certs. Like we want to make local certs easy and just put them inside your VM and configure your environment. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely things that we want to make simpler, but everyone can kind of benefit from that. It's not just Craft.
So what do you think, Patrick? You going to give it a shot?
I'll give it a shot. I mean, I still am looking at Docker as well, but man, this seems a lot easier, although your 5-minute read on Docker and you helping to teach me Docker is also pretty darn tempting. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a win though. Either way, just this looks easy enough. Just looking at the README, I hope there's more than just the GitHub README in terms of getting people in. I think Laravel Valet does a nice job with easy to approach documentation to get people up and running. But this looks easy enough for someone who can copy and paste a couple command line stuff in, and it also looks like it'll do enough with the Xdebug and hub module and all that more pro or custom Craft CMS developers can also get a lot out of this. This looks cool.
The plan is to have the Nitro docs eventually on docs.craftcms.com as well.
Great. To get someone to adopt something, I think good documentation is one of the most important things that you can have. And I think that is something that Vue.js, for instance, did an amazing job with. And I think that really, really helped with people ending up adopting it. But Jonathan, how about yourself? Like, you were interested in checking out Nitro, or what's the deal?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like my sentiment is maybe similar to Patrick. I love playing with new tools and new tooling, and so I'm absolutely going to jump at it and play with it. I will say though that going with Andrew Welch's setups is sort of like, it's like picking a continuous integration tool. Once you decide to go with it, you're kind of married to it. It's very difficult to divorce yourself away from it. But yeah, I'm excited to give it a try and see what it's all about.
I mean, you could say the same thing about certain diseases. I mean, Just because,
That's true.
yeah, that doesn't mean it's the right thing, you know? And the same setup is not right for every developer either. You know what I mean? Like I really do think it depends on what you're doing. And as Sean Larkin famously said, and I keep bringing up on the podcast because I really like it, it all starts with zero config, right? I mean, in the ideal world is that whatever it is you're using, you start it with zero config and you just run and you do it. But eventually at some point you need to get under the hood and you need to tweak it. And that's something that Pixel and Tonic historically has been good about, is giving you this prefab setup, going, here, go, do your thing, but then giving you ways to change and tweak it if you need to do that or outgrow what it is that you have there. And it sounds like, Jason, that's the direction you're taking with this thing.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the things that you would do can be done with Nitro or the same things you're going to do in a VPS, right? If I have a DigitalOcean droplet, I need to install these things, then the skills that you'll learn with doing Nitro, and I'm not saying like the goal is to have no DevOps, right? But you can still get in there and do something if you want to customize your Nginx configuration. But those are tools that are valuable, not just to local development, but also going into production. If you're doing a VPS, then this is a great way to kind of get your hands dirty. If you want to like try something in PHP or a configuration and see if it breaks it, then do it in Nitro and just destroy the machine when you're done.
Yeah.
But if you're going to use Docker, I still think there's valuable skills from using Docker locally, and then imagine supporting a Docker production thing when you're like, well, how do I SSH into the container? Well, you can't.
Right.
So, yeah.
I'll add that one of the things I think we're good at is listening to feedback and iterating. And like, I don't know if anyone was, I think Patrick was around, maybe Jonathan, for like the Craft 1.0 launch back in the day, or even the 0.9.
I was around for the blocks beta. Yeah.
Yeah. So we launched one of those. It might have been the 0.9 public beta or whatever. And like, we didn't even, like, you couldn't even delete a section or an entry, or like, we were just missing something. But you know, we iterate and we improve over time. We listen to feedback. So that's what we'll be doing with Nitro as well too.
Yeah, well, that's an opinionated CMS if it doesn't even let you delete stuff that's in it. I mean, Jesus.
You have to pay $25 to put a logo in the back end or whatever it was.
So
yeah, that was right.
So if we were to brainstorm Nitro taglines, you know, maybe it would be Nitro : hit the ground running, or Nitro : faster setup, faster development, you know, or something like that. That's kind of like what you're going for, is just get up and running quicker. And then when it is up and running, the actual development will be kind of not in your face so much. It'll be faster. It won't be as fast as, you know, Valet or something like that, because there are just more layers, but still it should be faster than doing something in Homestead or in Docker, right?
Yeah. And
Jason?
I think we've already covered the tagline.
Okay.
Nitro, it sucks the least.
It's
Please sell T-shirts.
Can you confirm that that's the tagline, Jason? Nitro, it sucks the least?
I mean, you know, I wish we could have recorded the conversations that we had when we were coming up with the name. That was probably the most ridiculous conversation I think I've had since working here. But it was a joy, because it was some of the names that came up. You know, you'll see that in the doc is, you know, there might be a Vin Diesel reference in there.
Well, and also the obvious Fifth Element references, right? Lilu or whatever, Multipass.
Yeah, Multipass. We didn't want to. Yeah, we spent. I mean, naming is. It's been said a million times. Naming is the hardest thing. We spent days trying to come up with names for this.
Do you want to know what it was originally called? Because I get a kick out of this.
Yes.
Do it.
PHP Dev.
PHP Dev. Okay. Yeah.
Yep. Wow. I didn't know what to call it, so I just said let's call it PHP Dev.
Yeah. I think Nitro is a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, Jason, you're obviously incredibly good at the DevOps stuff, but we're keeping you as far away from marketing as we possibly can.
Yeah, please do. Please.
That about wraps it up for another episode of the devMode.fm podcast. If you'd like to have every episode delivered to your favorite player, you can subscribe via RSS or find us on iTunes or Google Play. And if you like what we're doing, please review the show on iTunes. It's the best way to help others find the show. You can also find us on Twitter at devModeFM, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on this episode. Leave us a comment on the devMode.fm website where we can continue the conversation. For the devMode.fm podcast, I'm Andrew Welch.
I'm Patrick Harrington.
I'm Jonathan Melville.
And thank you, Jason McCallister, for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you, Brad Bell, for coming on. I appreciate it. We're going to get you some juniper pine tea so you can drink it, right?
Thanks, buddy.
All right. of you who missed it in the beginning, who weren't here in the beginning, Brad was talking about the fact that he moved to Oregon, and then Oregon decided they didn't like him, and the juniper trees emit some kind of pollen that tries to kill him every year, right?
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, it's the worst. I did mute all of my snot sucking, so
That's fantastic. But we have that part on the air, so now I'm stopping the